To kill Godzilla is a damn difficult feat, tried and tested by myriads of monsters. We don't have enough fingers to count the number of baddies that Godzilla has dealt with. He's been up against the three-headed king Gadora, the praying mantis kaiju Kamacuras, the lobster monster Ibira, the sludge giant Hedorah, the crystalline space Godzilla, the alien cyborg Gigan, the flower kaiju Biollante, the subterranean monster Baragon, the parasitic Mutos. Phew, Godzilla's gallery of villains is actually never-ending. Every time, well, almost every time, Godzilla has emerged victorious against the most grotesque and formidable of opponents. But guess what turned out to be the worst nightmare of the king of monsters? A metal capsule with micro-oxygen in it. Godzilla's ultimate arch-nemesis is not a monster, but an accidentally discovered weapon with the potential to put the invincible kaiju to sleep forever.
Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, then please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you, and let's begin.
Godzilla's kryptonite. What can bring the king of monsters to his knees? Oxygen Destroyer. Godzilla 1954. The Oxygen Destroyer is Godzilla's kryptonite, and it was established by Toho in the first ever Godzilla movie in 1954. Awakened by nuclear testing in the Pacific Ocean and mutated by radiation, the Godzilla became an unstoppable force that ravaged Japan, killing and injuring thousands, with the survivors suffering from radiation sickness. Simultaneously, scientist Daisuke Serizawa's obsession with the element oxygen accidentally made him chance upon a dangerous chemical reaction which he implemented to create the Oxygen Destroyer, a deadly weapon with the ability to wipe out any life form within its radius. Fearing the superpowers of the world would want to use his discovery to wage war, Serizawa remained tight-lipped till he demonstrated its effect within the confinement of a fish tank, which reduced the fish to mere bones. Witnessing Godzilla's rampaging spree and Japan's self-defense forces' failure at thwarting the monster, Serizawa was convinced to use the Oxygen Destroyer to kill Godzilla, but not before destroying all his research on it. When Godzilla was resting in Tokyo Bay, Serizawa dived down to the depths of the ocean, carrying the Oxygen Destroyer, and activated it, thus sacrificing his life and taking the formula to his grave. As the Oxygen Destroyer unleashed its load of micro-oxygen into the water, the corrosive chemical began disintegrating Godzilla, making him writhe in pain. He resurfaced once again to let out a final roar, before staggering back into the water as the chemical reaction dissolved his flesh completely, almost disintegrating his bones. Since then, the Oxygen Destroyer has been referenced in several Godzilla movies, but never used again until 2019's King of the Monsters. The reason why the Oxygen Destroyer was used only once in Toho's varied range of Godzilla movies was to honor Serizawa's sacrifice, who didn't want the world to recreate the weapon of mass destruction. As a scientist, no, as a human being, I can't allow that to happen, were his words. The Oxygen Destroyer was a gigantic metal capsule with a central chamber made of glass that contained dangerous amounts of micro-oxygen. When this comes in contact with water, it isolates the oxygen molecules and liquefies them. This essentially means that any creature, when exposed to the effects of an Oxygen Destroyer, would first suffocate from the lack of oxygen and then degenerate. Whether a monster is completely reduced to nothing or gravely damaged by the Oxygen Destroyer depends on the amount of micro-oxygen released from the payload. Godzilla King of the Monsters 2019. In 2019's King of the Monsters, the military targeted both Godzilla and King Ghidorah with the Oxygen Destroyer, and to say Godzilla was gravely injured would be an understatement. Incapacitated, Godzilla sank to the bottom of the ocean with his heartbeat decreasing at an alarming rate. With his vitals eventually fading, the Monarch scientists declared Godzilla dead. But this time around, Godzilla was a tad bit lucky, as he was later found recuperating in his radioactive lair under the ocean. Interestingly, while one scientist sacrifice killed Godzilla once, another brought the kaiju back to life. Seeing Godzilla's near-death condition because of the Oxygen Destroyer, which would take him years to recover from, Ishiro Serizawa walked into Godzilla's lair with a nuked warhead, sacrificing himself for his old friend, thus rejuvenating Godzilla yet again. 65 years after its inception, the Oxygen Destroyer's basic design was retained by the Monsterverse in 2019, but it was fired by attaching it to a missile instead of creating a chemical reaction upon hitting the water. The Oxygen Destroyer exploded like a bomb and produced an eerie green-hued mushroom cloud, immediately after which dead fish started popping up on the water's surface. This Oxygen Destroyer effectively killed sea life without really reducing them to skeletons. Oxygen Destroyer's mechanism. Godzilla is known to possess the power of enhanced regeneration, thanks to his G-cells. Now, the mechanism behind the Oxygen Destroyer being able to kill Godzilla lies in the fact that the weapon's immediate effects beat Godzilla's pace of regeneration. The chemical reaction from the Oxygen Destroyer continually decays his flesh absurdly faster than he could replenish it, as a result of which the 1954 Godzilla's flesh melted off, reducing him to a pile of bones. Anti-nuclear energy bacteria. Another way of thwarting Godzilla's regeneration was theorized to be the use of bacteria which would eat up his cells faster than they could regenerate. Thus, the genetically engineered anti-nuclear energy bacteria, or ANEB, was created in 1989's Godzilla vs. Biollante, a superweapon which could break down nuclear material and feed on them. The idea for ANEB was inspired by the success of another set of bacteria feeding on oil to manage oil spills in several countries. For the bacteria to work, scientists required a nuclear-rich genetic code, and thus the anti-nuclear energy bacteria was created using Godzilla's G-cells. In the 1989 film, Godzilla was shot multiple times with ANEB rockets, but they failed to weaken Godzilla. It was learned that for the bacteria to start activating within Godzilla, his body temperature needed to be raised, which happened when Biollante doused him in her acidic sap. With the JSDF also deploying maser cannons, with the bacteria feeding on his nuclear-rich composition and draining him of his radioactive powers, Godzilla was rendered unconscious and fell face first into the ocean. When the waves crashed onto him, cooling down his upper body, a severely weakened Godzilla retreated to his lair. The ANEB's weakening effects continued till 1991, forcing Godzilla to remain underwater and hibernate often to replenish his energy. He only recuperated completely in Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah after feeding on a nuclear submarine.
Mega Buster.
The end of a Titan. Has Godzilla ever been defeated? Mecha Godzilla. As you can surmise, beating the king of the monsters is a challenging job, and to be able to do that 4 times would be a humongous feat in the monster world. In this context, the King Slayer title goes to Mecha Godzilla, who has 4 wins against Gojira. In 1993's Godzilla vs. Mecha Godzilla 2, the robot kaiju digs his shock anchor harpoons into Godzilla and electrocutes Godzilla's second brain located at the lower part of his body, crippling him. It was only because Fire Rodent's life essence transferred into Godzilla that he was resurrected once again. In 2002's Godzilla against Mecha Godzilla, the robot kaiju was reimagined as Kiryu, built by humans from the bones of the 1954 Godzilla. In the film, Mecha Godzilla managed to severely injure Godzilla and drop him into the ocean, forcing him to retreat, thus scoring another win over Godzilla. In 2003's Godzilla Tokyo SOS, Kiryu returned for a rematch and drove his drill through Godzilla's chest and later disposed of him off into the ocean, bringing the score to Mecha Godzilla 3, Godzilla 0. In 2021's MonsterVerse movie, Godzilla vs. Kong, Mecha Godzilla crashed Godzilla into buildings, weakened him with a barrage of missiles, overpowered his atomic breath with his proton scream, knocked him down with his plasma punch, and more before attempting to fire his energy beam down Godzilla's throat. Had it not been for Kong's timely intervention, Godzilla would have been killed by Mecha Godzilla, which sure counts as a win for the robot monster. Mothra. In 1992's Godzilla vs. Mothra, Godzilla was defeated by the joint efforts of Mothra and her dark counterpart, Batra. While Batra was eventually killed by Godzilla, Mothra managed to carry the kaiju away from Japan and steal him off in the ocean. In 1964's Mothra vs. Godzilla, after the moth kaiju is killed, some of Mothra's offspring entrap Godzilla in a silken cocoon, forcing the incapacitated monster to plunge into the ocean, thus emerging victorious against Godzilla. Gadora. Another opponent who almost finished off Godzilla was the MonsterVerse Gadora from Godzilla King of the Monsters. Let's not forget, if not for Mothra's sacrifice, Gadora would have been the end of Godzilla. When Gadora prepares to finish off a defeated Godzilla, an already injured Mothra distracts Gadora by defiantly unfurling her wings at him and subsequently enduring Gadora's full fury. The incinerated Mothra's life essence transformed the injured Godzilla into an explosive version of himself. Biollante. Next we have Biollante, who also has a sure shot win against Godzilla. In Godzilla vs. Biollante, the plant kaiju spewed out her corrosive acidic sap at Godzilla, making his body temperature rise exponentially and activating the ANEB bacteria within him, eventually causing Godzilla to collapse. Kong. In 1962's King Kong vs. Godzilla, Kong had the unique ability to absorb electricity. Empowered by lightning, Kong repeatedly shocked Godzilla, taking the fight underwater into Sagami Bay. While Kong was later seen swimming home, there was no sign of Godzilla. Years later, Toho clarified in a synopsis that Kong was the winner of the underwater battle. Uncovering Godzilla's Achilles heel, his ultimate weaknesses. Second brain. Despite being the undisputed king of the monsters, Godzilla's various incarnations have exhibited weaknesses that leave the monster incapacitated. In Godzilla vs. Mecha Godzilla 2, the anti-Godzilla G-Force team extensively studied baby Godzilla's anatomy to discover that Godzilla is equipped with a second brain and that it controls the motor functions of Godzilla's lower body. With this knowledge, the military carried out a mission they dubbed G-Crusher. The G-Force tracked down the exact location of the second brain in Godzilla's body, where his tail meets his torso, enabling the Mecha Godzilla to pierce into the secondary appendage and blast it with electricity, thus completely paralyzing the kaiju. Godzilla was only able to regenerate his second brain owing to rodent sacrifice. However, it remains uncertain whether future incarnations of Godzilla also came with the same weakness as their 1993 predecessor. Oxygen Destroyer and ANEB. While Godzilla is immune to conventional weaponry, Dr. Serizawa's Oxygen Destroyer was proved to be his ultimate nemesis, killing him in 1954 and almost killing him in 2019. Same with Dr. Shiragami's anti-nuclear energy bacteria, which incapacitated Godzilla in 1989. Super X cadmium missiles. In 1984's The Return of Godzilla, the kaiju proved to be quite vulnerable against the cadmium missiles fired by the specially designed aerial combat vehicle Super X. When the Super X almost emptied its arsenal of cadmium shells into Godzilla's mouth, he was drained of its nuclear energy, with his heart temporarily stopping and making him collapse. Freezing weapons. Godzilla has also proved quite vulnerable to ice and freezing weapons. In Godzilla vs. Destroyer, to prevent the burning Godzilla from melting the Earth's core, the G-Force was able to freeze his melting remains with their collection of freezer weapons. 1955's Godzilla Raids Again and 2004's Godzilla Final Wars showed that burying Godzilla in ice can make him dormant for several years. However, it's not like Godzilla cannot fight in the cold like he did in Antarctica. It's just that sub-zero temperatures are not his favorite thing. In 1967, Son of Godzilla, the kaiju was also forced to retreat into hibernation by an artificially generated snowstorm on Solgale Island. In 2016's Shin Godzilla, the kaiju is frozen solid in the middle of Tokyo by pumping a blood coagulating agent inside of him through crane trucks. He remains alive but in an immobile, unconscious state. Leaking atomic breath. In Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah, giant monsters' all-out attack, Godzilla had swallowed a submarine, and when a missile was fired from the submarine inside his body, it reopened a wound on his chest, which was previously inflicted by Gadora. When Godzilla attempted to blast out his atomic breath, it leaked from his wound, creating a massive pressure buildup within his body. This caused Godzilla to explode, leaving behind just his beating heart at the bottom of the ocean. Secret weak spot. In the 2014 Godzilla movie, the parasitic Mutos targeted another weakness of Godzilla by puncturing the gills on his back, weakening him significantly. Later, when a stray missile hits his gills, Godzilla crashed into the Golden Gate Bridge on the San Francisco Bay. Lack of agility. Godzilla's monstrous bulk has also consistently proved to be a hindrance, slowing him down against more agile kaijus. In 2000's Godzilla vs. Megaguirus, the gigantic winged monster easily outmaneuvered Godzilla. Meanwhile, the several Mechagodzilla incarnations were seen to overpower Godzilla with missiles, faster than he can dodge them. Godzilla's lack of agility puts him at a serious disadvantage when fighting more than one opponent at once, like the Mutos from 2014's Godzilla and King Ghidorah's Three Heads and King of the Monsters. Marvelous verdict. The fact that Godzilla has died just a few times in a career spanning 70 years proves that bringing the King of the Monsters down is a near impossible feat. Also, Godzilla's iconic power, his atomic breath, a concentrated radioactive energy with a temperature of 500,000 degrees Celsius, overshadowed all his weaknesses. Blue, red, or purple, his atomic breath is known to have burned down cities, incinerated the toughest of opponents, blasted them into outer space, and even dodged the power of black holes. What are your thoughts on Godzilla's strengths and weaknesses? Tell us in the comments below, and if you liked our video, please give us a shout out and watch this space for more marvelous content.
If you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.